Sansa Stark stood by the window of her quarters in Winterfell, the morning air cold on her cheeks. Frost touched the panes of glass, but that did little to numb the steady swirl of urgency inside her. She had been raised in this land of ice and wind, taught to endure coldness in both nature and men. Yet what she contemplated now felt vastly more dangerous than any northern winter. Her mind flickered with images of dragons soaring over battlefields, of a silver-haired queen with eyes bright as the sea before a storm. Every voice of caution from her father's lessons told her to remain grounded, to be subtle. But the memory of her father's end reminded her that caution could be a liability in a realm choking on betrayal. Her breath was a thin mist before her lips. She reminded herself to be calm. Jon had gone beyond the wall some time ago, leading an expedition that teetered between legend and madness, hunting the dead, or so the stories claimed. The entire North was in flux, half the lords uncertain of their allegiance. Her sister Arya was more warrior now than girl, more stranger than sister in many ways. Her brother Bran, no, the three-eyed raven, if that was indeed who he had become, dwelt in his own realm of visions. As Lady of Winterfell in all but name, Sansa weighed what she could do for the North, for her family, for the kingdoms that had so often been unkind to her. She had always valued knowledge. Knowledge is power, Peter Baelish once said, and she had seen how cleverly he twisted it to his advantage. Sansa was no longer the naive girl who believed in the songs of knights and princesses. She understood the precarious game of influence, and she knew that every alliance carried the potential for either salvation or ruin. She turned from the window and let her gaze sweep over the thick draperies, the gray stone walls, the table upon which maps of the 7 kingdoms were carefully laid out. What if they reached out to Daenerys Targaryen first, before any formal war erupted between the living and the living, let alone the living and the dead? Yes, that was the spark of the idea. If they approached the Targaryen queen without suspicion, without the animosity that the North typically reserved for Targaryen rule, perhaps new bonds could be forged. In her heart, Sansa already knew this was the best course. There was a gravity to the threat beyond the wall, but also the southern threat of Cersei Lannister, who was rumored to be consolidating power at King's Landing. Chaos would soon erupt across the realm as armies of men prepared to clash. Jon had done his best to unify them, but time was a fragile commodity. If it was up to Sansa to act, she would try a different approach, an alliance that felt impossible but might save them all. She had considered sending a raven, but ravens carried only words. The realm was rife with mistrust, and a letter might do little to sway a queen rumored to have dragons and armies at her command. Words scrawled on parchment could be intercepted, twisted. No, this required something more personal. Sansa planned to send an envoy, someone the Dragon Queen would respect, someone who understood the intricacies of diplomacy. But such people were rare in the North. She thought of Davos Seaworth for a moment, admired his wit, his resourcefulness. But Davos was already with Jon. She thought of how her late mother, Catelyn Stark, had been a formidable negotiator, how her composure could disarm even the hardest hearts. Her mother was gone, of course, and with her, so many illusions of safety. Could Sansa herself undertake the journey? A part of her thrilled at the idea of forging her own path, stepping beyond the well-worn roads of fear. But leaving Winterfell unguarded in spirit, if not in arms, was risky. Her mind churned with possibilities as she walked to the table with the map. She ran a finger across the painted table's approximation of Westeros, stopping at Dragonstone, the ancient seat of House Targaryen where Daenerys was rumored to have landed. Sansa's next breath felt like a small resolution. She would send an envoy, yes, but the message would be unmistakably from her. The request for Daenerys Targaryen to come north, not as a conqueror but as an ally. The day advanced with a muted hush. The corridors of Winterfell bustled with the usual routine, servants hauling firewood, guards posted, the blacksmith forging arms for the winter. But Sansa's world was consumed with this single decision that might alter the fate of the realm. She summoned Maester Wolkan, who arrived promptly, a sheaf of parchment in hand. "Your ladyship," the maester said quietly, bowing his head. Sansa offered a tight, polite smile. "I have a message I need written. It is for Queen Daenerys Targaryen, believed to be residing at Dragonstone." He blinked. "Are you quite certain, my lady?" "It said she possesses it." "Yes, I am. This letter must be precise and conciliatory. It must emphasize the gravity of the threat we face from the White Walkers, but also our desire to find a peaceful path forward in the realm of the living. She then paced by the map, words filling her mind. She began dictating, carefully selecting her phrases. The letter was short, respectful, and dire. It spoke of the long night that was coming, the threat that unified them all under the same peril if only they could see it. It mentioned she was Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell, sister to Jon Snow, King in the North, who sought any and all who would stand with them against the darkness. When finished, she studied the words on the parchment with a maester. It was direct, urgent. It was also, subtly, a request for Daenerys to trust the sincerity of the North and an invitation for a parley if the Targaryen queen found such a notion worth her time. She sealed the letter with the dire wolf sigil in hot wax. As the wax cooled, she could not help but recall the countless letters that had once placed her family in danger. This was a risk, no doubt, but this was a different time, and she was no longer that frightened girl. She tasked a loyal rider, one of her father's old bannerman's sons, to set out at dawn for Dragonstone with only a handful of guards. A large party might be seen as a threat or slow them too much. The boy who accepted the mission was named Aaron, his shoulders tense with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. As she stood in the courtyard before his departure, she pulled him aside. "Be careful," she said softly, keeping her voice low. "This letter carries our hopes for an alliance that could save countless lives. Take no foolish risks, but make haste. Daenerys Targaryen's people may question you. Answer them with honesty and respect." Aaron nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, my lady. I will do as you command." Sansa watched them ride out through the gates, a swirl of snow around the horses' hooves. Her heart pounded in her chest with a strange elation that came from taking action. She could almost feel the threads of fate weaving a new pattern. The next days were a study in waiting. She remained vigilant, continuing the routines of overseeing Winterfell, ensuring the stores of food would suffice for the winter, and quietly smoothing over any arguments among the lords who rallied to the king in the north. Through it all, a persistent whisper in her mind asked what Daenerys might say or do if this letter actually reached her. Night fell early in the north. Sansa often found herself awake, a candle burning low, lost in the swirl of fears and hopes that came with daring to step outside the lines. If Daenerys Targaryen chose war over alliance, had Sansa simply handed the queen an invitation to sweep north and subjugate the realm of her forefathers? And yet, if Daenerys was as just and forward-thinking as some rumors suggested, perhaps she would see the value in standing together, perhaps that was the wisdom she had gleaned from the ashes of Slavers Bay. Weeks later, when the snow was piled deep around Winterfell's walls, a raven arrived. Sansa received it with trembling hands, though she wore her usual mask of poise for the benefit of the gathered guards. She retreated to her chambers, shut the door, and broke the seal. The message was elegant, written in a practiced hand. It expressed the queen's curiosity, recognized the dire threat Sansa claimed lay beyond the wall, and cordially accepted the invitation to come north under the condition that Sansa would ensure her safety and hear her terms of allegiance. Sansa felt a rush of air leave her lungs. So that was it, Daenerys Targaryen herself would come to Winterfell. Sansa's mind soared with speculation. How many men would the queen bring? Would there be dragons circling the skies above her ancestral home? A flutter of awe and worry mingled in Sansa's chest, and she placed the letter on the table, letting her fingertips rest on the parchment as though trying to tether herself to reality. She wasted no time in preparing. The ravens flew, summoning the northern lords to Winterfell once more, for Sansa desired a show of unity. Let them see that she did not act in secret. She needed them to trust her, to stand behind her. So many had followed her father, her brother Robb, and now Jon. She prayed that they would follow her lead in forging this alliance with the Targaryen queen. When some days had passed, word came from her scouts that the Targaryen host approached from the east, traveling the King's Road in a long column. The people of the north, those who lived in the small villages along the route, had begun to talk of the dragons, glimpsed as shadows or monstrous silhouettes in the sky. Their roars carried across the wind, chilling the hearts of men and women unaccustomed to such creatures outside of rumors and bedtime horrors. Sansa stood on the battlements as the travelers arrived. A hush fell over the courtyard. Soldiers marched beneath banners of the three-headed dragon. The pace was steady, disciplined, reminiscent of a great machine. The unsullied ranks, rumored to be unstoppable and fearless, came first, their spears upright, their faces expressionless. Dothraki horsemen lingered beyond, scanning the walls with curious eyes, some letting out uneasy huffs in the cold. Finally, 3 colossal shapes appeared in the sky. A collective gasp went up from the men and women atop Winterfell's ramparts. The dragons. Even from a distance, one could sense their raw power, vast wings beating the air, stirring the snow into swirling flurries. They cast huge shadows over the courtyard as they descended. One let out a roar, a bellow that seemed to vibrate every stone in the fortress. Sansa inhaled slowly, forcing herself not to shy away. She kept her posture tall, cloak trimmed in white fur. She was the Lady of Winterfell and would treat with a queen as an equal in the realm of negotiation. She saw the Targaryen queen then, dismounting from the largest of the dragons with a fluid ease, her silver hair gleaming in the pale northern sun. Daenerys Targaryen wore dark leathers lined with a deep red that hinted at her house colors, a cloak trailing behind her. Beside her walked Tyrion Lannister, shorter in stature but far from insignificant in presence. Surrounding them were several key advisors and guards, Missandei, Grey Worm, and others Sansa only knew by rumor. As Daenerys passed under the main gate into Winterfell's courtyard, Sansa descended the steps to greet her. The hush that had fallen over the watchers seemed impenetrable, as though the entire fortress collectively held its breath. Their gazes met, the two young women who had inherited so much of their family's legacies, so much duty and pain, from fathers who had lost everything. Though Daenerys had lost hers before she could even know him, Daenerys spoke first, her voice resonant and sure. "Lady Sansa Stark, I have come in good faith, answering your summons." Sansa allowed herself a gentle nod, meeting Daenerys's gaze without dropping her eyes. "You honor us with your presence, your grace. Winterfell welcomes you, and your dragons." A faint smile touched Daenerys's lips. "Dragons do not always receive a kind welcome, but I hope we may change that." The tension in the courtyard pulsed, but Sansa turned and gestured. "Let us speak inside, where we might discuss matters more comfortably. The North is not known for its warm weather." A small flash of humor flickered in Daenerys's eyes. "No, it is not." And so, with a silent guard of Unsullied and Northmen forming a respectful perimeter, they entered the great hall. Sansa had prepared it carefully. Enough fire to ward off the chill, tables laden with simple but hearty fare. The northern lords and ladies stood in attendance at the edges, uneasy but watchful. The Targaryen retinue took their places near their queen, while Sansa stepped onto the dais, the seat of the Stark family behind her. Daenerys stood before her, still commanding in presence, with Tyrion Lannister at her side. Sansa's eyes flicked over Tyrion, recalling the strange bond they once shared. He had been her husband, if only for a short time, an unconsummated political marriage, but a marriage all the same. She remembered him as kinder than most, and she offered him a small nod, a subtle acknowledgement. He returned it, a slight wry smile curving his lips. It was Tyrion who broke the measured stillness. "Winterfell has changed since I last saw it, though, if I recall, the chill remains the same." His attempt at levity fell softly, and while some in the hall shifted uncomfortably, Sansa responded in an even tone. "I pray the North will prove itself hospitable, Lord Tyrion." Daenerys's gaze traveled the hall, taking in every detail. "I appreciate the welcome, Lady Stark, and I admire your forthrightness in asking for my assistance. Most do not consider it an option to parley. They assume war is the only choice. But you speak of an enemy beyond the wall, an enemy not of houses or men, but of death itself. I have heard such tales before, yet your letter insists it is not merely a story." Sansa's throat felt tight as she remembered the horrors described by Jon. She had not witnessed the army of the dead with her own eyes, but she had faith in Jon's accounts and the rumblings of the free folk who had fled south. "It's no story, Your Grace," Sansa said, letting her voice carry. "The White Walkers are real, and they bring an endless army of whites. If we do not unite, there will be no 7 kingdoms left to rule. Winter is here, and with it the dead." A murmur swept through the northern lords. The great hall's torches crackled. Daenerys nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I have come here because part of me believes you, and also because you invited me, offering a chance for us to find common cause. But I must ask, if I give my aid, what of the North's loyalty? What place does House Stark envision in the realm I intend to forge?" That was the question that always hovered. Would the North bend the knee if Daenerys Targaryen proved to be a just and effective queen? Jon had refused to bend to Cersei Lannister, but had he truly refused Daenerys? Sansa did not have all the answers, but she knew that forging an alliance could involve compromise. Yet Sansa had learned caution. She knew better than to give everything away in one breath. My brother Jon is king in the north. He is away on a vital mission, but I speak for House Stark in his absence. Our priority is survival for all living people. Without survival, no kingdom matters. If you prove your commitment to saving the realm from the Great Other, then we will stand beside you as allies. A slight tension flickered in Daenerys' features. Allies, not subjects. It was a careful word, likely chosen with intention. But Daenerys did not lash out. Instead, she took a measured breath, glancing toward Tyrion. I have learned that unwavering demands cause more harm than good. Let us see how we stand together in war before we define the shape of the peace that follows. A sense of relief fluttered in Sansa's chest. This was a good beginning. Not everything was resolved, but Daenerys was willing to listen, and that meant so much. Sansa gestured to a seat that had been placed in a place of honor at the long table below the dais. Be seated, Your Grace. Rest from your travels. We can discuss strategy and see what might be done. The assembled lords waited, some tense, others intrigued. Daenerys took her seat, her posture regal. Tyrion, Grey Worm, Missandei, and a few others sat alongside her. Sansa descended from the dais and joined them. As they settled, the low hum of conversation returned, though hushed, as if the entire hall was still in wonder at having a Targaryen queen in their midst, one who had arrived not as a conqueror but in answer to an invitation. They spoke for hours of the threat beyond the wall, of the wildling alliances, of the measures needed to fortify the north. Daenerys listened, and her brow furrowed at the mention of whites that neither felt mercy nor fear. She questioned how her dragons might be deployed and whether the rumored vulnerability of these creatures to fire could turn the tide. When the meeting ended, a cautious optimism filled the hall. Sansa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Of course, the path ahead was riddled with unknowns. How would Jon react to Daenerys' arrival, to the willingness of the North to extend a hand to someone claiming the Iron Throne? Still, if there was any chance to stave off the annihilation she feared, it lay in unity. That night, a grand feast was prepared, not lavish by southern standards, but the best the North could offer given the precarious times. Mead was poured, bread and meat served. The lords and ladies of the North watched the Targaryen entourage with guarded curiosity, while the Dothraki and Unsullied looked upon the thick northern walls and the fur-clad men and women with equal wonder. Daenerys sat at Sansa's right hand, and they exchanged polite conversation, though seldom drifting into personal matters. There was a certain formality to it all, two women who had never expected to be sitting side by side in Winterfell's great hall, forging an alliance that might reshape the entire land. Tyrion broke some of the ice with his wry commentary. He toasted the memory of Eddard Stark, a man he said had once shown him the courtesy of honest scorn. Some of the Northmen laughed, albeit nervously. Then Tyrion raised his cup again to Lady Sansa, calling her the guiding light of the North in his half-droll manner. Sansa felt a small tinge of color flush her cheeks, but she accepted the toast with composure. The next morning, Sansa rose early to greet Daenerys in the courtyard. Snow drifted lazily from the gray sky, dusting the stones. Daenerys' dragons perched on the higher walls, their reptilian eyes scanning the surroundings with primal awareness. The sight of them so close to the fortress walls was unnerving, but also gave Sansa a strange sense of power. Perhaps these creatures could be an instrument of salvation, not just destruction. They spoke of logistics. Daenerys expressed the desire to see the wall herself, to witness the threat. Sansa proposed that they ride to Castle Black or perhaps even Eastwatch. But such a journey would be treacherous, especially as winter deepened. There was also the possibility of the Night King's forces pressing closer, though recent reports suggested the bulk of the dead remained far to the north. Despite the uncertainties, Daenerys was resolute. She had not come this far just to sit idly in a castle. If she was to wage war against an enemy beyond mortal comprehension, she needed to witness them firsthand. Sansa considered this stance both admirable and terrifying. She offered no resistance. Your dragons, I'm told, will fare better in the cold than many men might, Sansa said quietly, her breath swirling in the wintry air. But the north is vast, and the roads can become impassable. Daenerys' eyes sparked with determination. My dragons will see me through, and I'll bring only those I trust. If the threat is real, I must see it. I do not fear the cold. Behind her, Tyrion stepped forward, concern etched on his face. Your Grace, if I may, perhaps we should consider whether the risk is worth it. We have only just arrived, and we haven't established a secure supply line or safe havens. Daenerys gave him a measured smile. I value your caution, Tyrion, but the longer we wait, the more time is lost. Winter is here. Sansa understood that impatience. She felt it too. Some part of her wanted to join Daenerys on that flight north to see what lay beyond the safety of Winterfell's walls. But she needed to remain to keep the north steady. A single misstep in politics could unravel everything they had built. I will stay, Sansa said, with a conviction that belied the swirl of curiosity in her heart. Winterfell is my duty, and if my brother returns, I must be here to meet him. But I'll send men to escort you. The Night's Watch will receive you, and they'll confirm that the threat is real. Daenerys inclined her head. I thank you, Lady Stark. Your bravery in sending that letter, in forging this bond, will not be forgotten. The men Sansa chose were stout, loyal, and familiar with the roads to Castle Black. Among them was Brienne of Tarth, standing tall and imposing in her armor, someone Sansa trusted with her life. Brienne did not relish leaving Sansa's side, but accepted her lady's instruction to ensure the queen arrived safely. Sansa knew that none was more devoted to her mother's memory and to Sansa's well-being than Brienne. If anything went awry, Sansa trusted Brienne to do what must be done. Before Daenerys departed, the queen pulled Sansa aside into a small antechamber off the Great Hall. The walls were lined with old tapestries, the scene lit by a single torch. For a moment, they regarded each other. Two women who had worn crowns of burden, one in truth, the other in the hearts of her people. Daenerys spoke softly. I can't say I imagined this, forging alliances in Winterfell, once a land rumored to hate my family above all others. Sansa breathed in, remembering the horrific tales of the Mad King and the atrocities inflicted upon her grandfather and uncle. She remembered, too, how the sins of the father might not define the child. I, too, have heard the stories, and I'm sure you've heard tales of northern intransigence and pride. Yet here we stand. A hint of a sad smile graced Daenerys' lips. Yes, we do. I hope this is the start of a better future. They parted on that note, neither fully relaxed, but both acknowledging a fledgling sense of respect. In the courtyard, the dragons loomed and Daenerys mounted Drogon, the largest of the three. Rhaegal and Viserion roared as if in farewell. The unsullied contingent that remained in Winterfell would keep the peace, while a smaller group accompanied their queen. Brienne led her horse, scanning the sky warily. With a thunder of wings, the dragons leapt into the air. Sansa watched, the cold wind whipping at her cloak as Daenerys soared northward with her entourage below. For the first time in her life, Sansa saw a future that might be reshaped by choice rather than forced by circumstance. The war had not yet begun in earnest, but already the pieces on the board had shifted. Days turned into weeks. Winter's hand grew harsher. Snow piled high, roads became treacherous. Still, the people of the north spoke in hushed excitement and trepidation of the Dragon Queen who had come and gone. Sansa did her best to keep the morale steady. She supervised the forging of dragon glass weapons, a measure that Jon had insisted was vital for facing the Whites. Daenerys had brought shipments of the substance from Dragonstone, which her men said was rich in it. Each night, Sansa paced her chambers. She tried to imagine the flight Daenerys was taking, what she might see at the wall, or beyond it. Reports came sporadically. One raven arrived from Castle Black stating that the queen had indeed reached them, that they would escort her beyond the wall at her request. Sansa's stomach twisted at the thought. Even for someone with dragons, it seemed a perilous journey. If the unimaginable was true, if Daenerys encountered the army of the dead, then everything Sansa had done would be justified. But if Daenerys faltered, Sansa could hardly bear the possibilities. It felt like 1,000 different gambles, and she had placed all her chips on a Targaryen queen she barely knew. Soon enough, the silence from the wall became agonizing. The ravens reported no further updates. The nights darkened early, the dawn tardy in arrival. Snow turned the fields into a blinding expanse of white. Wolves howled outside Winterfell's walls at odd hours, stirring the inhabitants from uneasy sleep. Lord Glover, Lord Manderley, others pressed Sansa for answers. Where's the Targaryen queen? Where are her dragons? Should we prepare for the worst? Sansa had few assurances to give. We will not panic, she told them. Queen Daenerys made her choice. We must trust in her. She took solace in the fact that Daenerys had chosen to leave a portion of her forces in Winterfell rather than risk them beyond the wall. Tyrion Lannister remained, assisting with strategic planning and forging a tenuous camaraderie with some of the northern lords. At times, Sansa would spot him in the library, poring over ancient tomes that discussed the long night. He seemed troubled yet driven. One late evening, Sansa found Tyrion there amidst the flickering light of several candles. Lord Tyrion, she greeted softly. Have you found anything of use? He looked up, tired lines etched on his face. If anything of use, you mean definitive proofs that the walking dead can be easily beaten? No, my lady. but I have found prophecies, stories, accounts of great calamities. It seems this realm has always flirted with destruction. She approached, glancing at the scattered books. History repeats itself, I suppose. He raised an eyebrow. And sometimes it changes. Which is why you wrote that letter, isn't it? She nodded, a small pang of doubt fluttering in her. I just hope it's enough. He placed a gentle hand on her arm. You've done something extraordinary. You've made an ally of the most formidable ruler alive, one who claims birthright but also a sense of justice. That's a rare combination. Sansa pursed her lips. Sometimes I fear it won't matter. The dead care little for justice or birthright. He sighed and closed one of the tomes. True, but dragons might make them care. Despite her anxiety, a quiet spark of hope lit in Sansa's chest. Dragons? If Daenerys returned triumphantly, if she managed to confirm the reality of the White Walkers, the entire realm might unite. Could it be done? Could the petty squabbles of houses and lords dissolve in the face of an existential threat? Sansa could only pray. Days passed with no ravens. The hush of Winterfell took on a somber cast, as if the very stones waited for news. Then came a day when the watch on the ramparts cried out that a dragon approached. Sansa hurried to the battlements, her breath catching in her throat as she saw a shape in the distant sky, cutting through the haze of snow. One shape, not three. Her heart pounded. She rushed down to the courtyard as the dark silhouette grew larger, beating massive wings. The watchers parted, forming a ring. Tyrion appeared by her side, his expression tight with apprehension. Grey Worm stood at attention, glancing upward. When Drogon landed with a crash of talons, Daenerys slid off his side. Her hair was tangled by wind, her face marked with exhaustion. At her back was a smaller retinue than she had taken north. Sansa's eyes darted among them, searching for Brienne, who mercifully was there, though she seemed battered, a bandage wrapped around her left arm. Daenerys's gaze met Sansa's. The queen's eyes were fiery, but there was a sadness and anger. She strode forward, kneeling slightly from the weight of fatigue, letting Grey Worm and another guard assist her. But it was clear the journey had taken its toll. Without ceremony, Daenerys said, "We found them. The dead. And the Night King." A collective hush. Tyrion stepped forward, voice trembling. "Your Grace." Daenerys closed her eyes as if trying to gather her thoughts. "We fought them beyond the wall. We saw whites by the thousands. We lost good men. We lost," her throat bobbed. "I lost one of my children. Viserion is gone." A sorrowful gasp rippled through those who understood. Sansa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Daenerys's grief was evident, raw as an open wound. She explained in halting words how the undead army had overwhelmed them in the bitter cold, how Viserion had been struck down by the Night King himself, who hurled a spear of ice with impossible strength and accuracy. "He fell," Daenerys said, voice breaking. "I saw him die. And then they raised him." Sansa went rigid. The Night King had raised a dragon from the dead? There were no words to encapsulate that horror. She exchanged a glance with Tyrion, whose face had gone ashen. Daenerys continued, forcing the words out. "We fled. It was all we could do. Jon Snow was separated from us. I tried to wait for him, to save him, but," she exhaled sharply, grief giving way to anger. "He made it back on his own, eventually, to Eastwatch. But the dead were not far behind." Sansa's heart lurched. "Jon is alive?" Daenerys nodded. "He lives. He was injured. They're bringing him down the road. He insisted we return to Winterfell while we could. The army of the dead marches south. The Night King has a dragon now, my dragon. We saw him breach the wall with its ice-blue flames." A wave of raw fear and sorrow crashed through Sansa. Her eyes burned, but she held herself together. The wall was breached. The north, all of them, were exposed to the endless legions of the dead. Yet, for all that terror, she saw determination in Daenerys's face. The Targaryen queen straightened, her jaw set. "The time for petty alliances and half-measures is over. We must band together now, or we all perish." Sansa placed a steady hand on Daenerys's arm. "You are right, Your Grace." Her voice trembled, but she spoke with conviction. "We will stand together. How Stark stands with you." Tyrion's voice was thick. "All of Westeros must stand with us, or there is no Westeros." In that moment, Sansa realized that everything had changed. Her decision to send that letter, to invite Daenerys north, had ensured the Dragon Queen's forces were now focused on the true threat. If Sansa had not done so, Daenerys might have marched on King's Landing or battled armies of men, ignorant of the real war. Now at least, they had a chance, albeit a desperate one. Some hours later, as Daenerys warmed herself by a roaring fire in the great hall, drinking a restorative cup of spiced wine, she recounted the details more fully. The hush in the hall was absolute, everyone enthralled by the horror and awe of her story. She told of the Night King's silent command, how his minions attacked in unrelenting waves, how whites were indeed vulnerable to dragon fire but not nearly as many as they had hoped to destroy. Their numbers seemed infinite. "We must fortify Winterfell," Daenerys said, her voice quieter than before but still carrying a steely undercurrent. "And we must send ravens to every corner of Westeros, to every lord and lady who has not yet declared their support. We need men. We need every sword, every spear. Time is short. The army of the dead marches even now." Sansa nodded, still reeling. "Yes. We'll gather all we can. House Manderley, House Glover, the Knights of the Vale who remain loyal, all who hold any scrap of allegiance to the north. You must call your bannermen from the Stormlands, the Reach, wherever you have influence." "I will," Daenerys promised, a dull ache evident in her eyes. "And if Cersei Lannister refuses to see reason, then she signs her own death warrant. We will not waste men fighting her, not while the dead are at our gates. But if she marches on us from behind," her tone darkened, "we need a truce or a victory. Either way, we cannot be divided." Sansa pulled her furs tighter. Her mind raced to all the challenges ahead, the politics, the traveling hazards, the question of forging alliances with houses that once despised Targaryens or who had old grievances against the Starks. Yet what choice did they have? The songs of old told of the long night, but no one truly remembered how the living had triumphed. They would need to create a new story. A story of dragons and wolves united, or else all would end in darkness. At the end of that long night of stories and planning, Sansa found herself alone with Daenerys near the dying embers of the hearth. The hall was largely empty now, Tyrion and the others having drifted off for rest. Snow whispered at the windows, the winds moaned faintly audible through the thick walls. Daenerys stared into the embers, her face drawn. "I dreamt of retaking the Iron Throne my entire life," she said quietly. "Now I dream only of stopping death from swallowing our world." Sansa understood the weight of redefined purpose. She had dreamt once of being a queen, dancing at tournaments, living in a world of courtly love. That naive version of her had died. Now she was Lady of Winterfell, hardened by the cruelty of war and betrayal. "Things do not always happen as we expect," Sansa said. Daenerys turned her gaze to Sansa. "No, but perhaps sometimes that's for the best. Your letter changed everything. If you had not reached out, I might have spent precious time fighting my way toward King's Landing, squandering my armies only to face the dead after it was too late." Sansa did not quite smile, but her expression softened. "I only did what I believed I must. My father once said that we must protect the family and by extension all who look to us for leadership. It's a lesson I took too long to learn." Daenerys extended her hand, and after a heartbeat's hesitation, Sansa clasped it gently. The contact felt like a tenuous bridge of warmth in a winter of uncertainty. For that moment, they understood each other as women who had been broken by the world yet rose to shape it anew. They parted in silence, letting the hush of Winterfell's nighttime corridors embrace them. Beyond the fortress walls, the wind howled, and somewhere in the depths of the far north, the Night King marched with his new, terrible weapon. The real war loomed. But the living were not yet defeated. And thanks to Sansa Stark's bold choice, the realm's best chance now stood with dragons and wolves side by side, forging a new future if they could survive the onslaught of death that advanced relentlessly southward. Over the next 2 days, a tense calm settled upon Winterfell. Daenerys rested, surrounding herself with a small circle of advisors. Sansa ensured she had every comfort available, though comforts in the north were meager compared to the south, especially with winter deepening. The two women, so different in upbringing and temperament, found themselves unexpectedly united by shared purpose. Sansa noticed how Daenerys would occasionally pause in conversation, her gaze drifting, the devastation of losing Viserion returning to her eyes. No words eased that grief, so Sansa did not attempt any hollow consolations. She simply offered the queen a seat by the fire and a listening ear if Daenerys chose to speak. Tyrion grew busier than ever, dispatching ravens to lords near and far. Missandei worked tirelessly beside him, her calm presence and steady organizational sense a boon in the swirling chaos. Grey Worm and the Unsullied patrolled the grounds with an unwavering discipline that impressed the northern soldiers, though some still viewed them with awe-tinged suspicion. Everywhere Sansa turned, she felt the hush of worry. The Stark bannermen and the Targaryen forces occupied the same castle, uneasy allies in a war that would soon sweep over them all. News arrived of Jon's slow return down the King's Road, aided by a small band of free folk who had come south after the wall's fall. Sansa ensured the gates would remain open, though watchful day and night, so that any survivors from the far north could find refuge. The trickle of refugees brought harrowing stories. They spoke of how the dead advanced like a relentless flood, of how the weather seemed to worsen wherever their footsteps touched. Some said the wind itself moaned with the voices of lost souls. It was late on the second evening when torches flared near Winterfell's main gate, a shout carrying through the courtyard. Sansa, already half-dressed in her cloak for an inspection, rushed outside. The cold cut at her cheeks, but she scarcely felt it when she saw the small group entering. Horses stumbled in, their riders exhausted, chainmail rattling. Jon Snow sat at the head of the column, his face pale, his eyes ringed with shadows. He looked as though he had not slept in days. Sansa ran to him, ignoring decorum. Jon nearly toppled from his horse, and she caught his arm with a gasp. Others rushed forward to help. Behind Jon, Tormund Giantsbane and a few Night's Watch brothers, half-frozen, dismounted with grim expressions. When they finally steadied Jon on the ground, he managed a weak smile that flickered over the lines of fatigue in his face. "Sansa," he murmured. "You're well." She tried to speak, but her throat locked. With a slight nod, she gestured for a pair of guards to assist him to the great hall. Daenerys appeared at the courtyard's edge, pale but resolved, and she moved quickly to Jon's side. For an instant, Sansa saw them both in the torchlight, the king in the north, burdened by near-impossible trials, and the Dragon Queen, her own losses recent and raw. She could not have imagined this scene even a few months ago, but it felt oddly right that they should stand side by side. Jon's injuries were not dire, but there were gashes along his ribs and bruises that marred his torso. Once inside, they laid him on a bench near the hearth. A maester tended to him while the others gathered in concern. Jon insisted on sitting upright, though his face twisted in pain. "I'm fine," he said hoarsely. "Don't fuss over me." Daenerys' voice was quiet and urgent. "We will fuss until we know you're not about to die from those wounds. Lie still." He relented but kept his gaze locked on her. Something unspoken passed between them, a mixture of regret, relief, and perhaps understanding. Sansa noticed the small gesture, Jon's hand reaching out to brush Daenerys's and the queen clasping his fingers gently before releasing them. In another circumstance, Sansa might have teased her brother or questioned him further, but the times were too grave for any such banter. She was only relieved he was alive. When the maester finished cleaning and dressing his wounds, Jon grimaced but pushed himself more upright. "The wall is gone," he said, his voice heavy. "Eastwatch is in ruins. The Night King has a dragon Viserion. He's unstoppable in the skies and the white swarm below. We couldn't hold. We barely escaped with our lives." Sansa glanced at Daenerys, who gave a solemn nod, her eyes shining with a touch of old tears. They had all heard the tale, but hearing Jon confirm it felt like a final nail in the sea. Often of the realm's illusions. Tyrion hovered at the edge of the firelight, his features grim. Tormund leaned against a stone pillar, shaking his head in silent acknowledgement. Jon continued, "They're moving south faster than anyone could have guessed. We have a few days, at most, before they're at our doorstep. Winterfell might be the first major stronghold in their path now that the wall is shattered." A chill of dread slipped down Sansa's spine. She remembered the last time Winterfell fell to enemies, but that had been men, and men could be reasoned with, or at least frightened away. These foes, these creatures, knew no fear, no mercy. "We'll defend it," she said, her voice trembling with the enormity of the task, but she steadied her tone. "We have to." Daenerys shifted closer to Jon. "My army is here for that very reason," she said, softly but firmly. "And Drogon, Regal, they will fight. We have Dragonglass. We have fire. We'll make a stand. The North will not stand alone, Jon." He closed his eyes briefly, a wave of relief crossing his features. Then he opened them, looking at Sansa. "Thank you. For reaching out to her, for forging this alliance." His voice cracked a little. I wouldn't have dared to hope." Sansa felt a spark of warmth in that acknowledgement. "We still have so far to go," she said quietly. "But at least we're together." That night, the castle rumbled with renewed urgency. Jon conferred with Daenerys, Tyrion, and the leading commanders Grey Worm, Ser Jorah Mormont, who had arrived with Daenerys' forces, and the northern lords like Lord Glover, Lord Manderley, and the few knights of the Vale who answered to House Stark. They studied a large map laid out on a table in the war room. Markers indicated the likely route of the dead, given the known path they'd taken. "There's no question, they'll come from the direction of the last hearth," Jon explained, tracing his finger across the map. "The Umbers are lost as far as we know. If any survived, they'd have fled south. The Night King is heading straight for us." Grey Worm's voice was measured. "We must use the open ground wisely. The army of the dead never tires. Ours does. We cannot risk meeting them in a field battle that drags on through the night." Tormund grunted. "We'll have to hold the walls." Rain Dragon fired down upon them from above. Sansa wrapped her arms around herself. The torches on the walls flickered, casting dancing shadows on the map. And if the Night King arrives on Viserion? Daenerys' eyes hardened. Drogon and Rhaegal will challenge him in the sky. That might be our only chance, dragon against dragon. But let's not underestimate what the Night King can do. A hush fell. Everyone there understood that if the dragons failed, Winterfell would likely be overrun, no matter how valiantly they fought. The army of the dead was endless, unstoppable once they breached the walls. Yet giving in to despair was no option. Jon looked at them all in turn. We know Dragonlance works and Valyrian steel. We have some of each, but not enough to arm everyone. Put the weapons in the hands of the best fighters. We'll position archers on the battlements with dragonglass-tipped arrows. Light as many trenches around the castle as we can, fill them with spikes. We make the approach as lethal as possible. Tyrion nodded. We'll also need a fallback plan in case the walls fail. We should have a central keep somewhere to protect the non-combatants. If it comes to that, we'll fight a desperate last stand, but at least give the women and children a chance to survive until the dragons can intervene. Sansa swallowed, remembering how the crypts of Winterfell were once considered a safe place. But against the Night King, even the dead in the crypts gave her pause. She forced the thought aside, deciding not to speak it aloud. We'll do what we must, she finally said. The War Council continued late into the night, details hammered out until each group had clear orders. There was no guarantee any of it would work, but there was no room for error. Every man, woman, and child in Winterfell was pressed to help. Sansa oversaw the distribution of provisions and saw to the weaving of netting that could be lit afire, the creation of barricades, anything that might slow the undead surge. Northern houses continued streaming in with more troops, though each arrival brought harrowing tales of towns and farms left behind. In the cold gray dawn, Sansa paused by the walls to watch Rhaegal and Drogon circling overhead. The thrum of their wings was immense, a tangible reminder that a different kind of power now watched over Winterfell. She felt a swirl of gratitude toward Daenerys. Had the Queen chosen another path, the North would stand alone, with no hope of resisting the undead dragon soon to descend upon them. That morning, Jon awakened early despite his injuries. Sansa found him donning mail, a stern set to his jaw. She stepped into the armory, her furs trailing behind her. Jon looked up and a tired smile lifted one corner of his mouth. You shouldn't be up, Sansa chided softly. He shrugged, wincing slightly. Shouldn't waste time lying in bed either. Besides, there's too much to do. She studied him, his eyes still shadowed, the bruise on his cheek stark against his pallor. Daenerys won't be pleased to see you up so soon. He let out a subdued huff of amusement. She can't stop me. Then his expression softened. I'm grateful to you, Sansa. You saw the bigger picture before any of us. If Daenerys and her dragons were in the south right now or fighting Cersei, we'd have no chance. You saved us. She felt an unexpected surge of emotion, remembering all the times she had felt helpless as a pawn of powerful men. It was a risk, she said, her voice catching slightly, and I was terrified it would backfire. But you taught me something, Jon. You said we have to fight for the living, no matter the risk. Jon reached out, and for a moment they clasped forearms, the old sign of solidarity among their ancestors. Then he fastened his sword belt, pulling on gloves lined with fur. We do what needs doing. Are you ready for what comes next? Sansa exhaled shakily. As ready as I can be. Word arrived by Raven that Cersei Lannister had learned of the wall's fall and the undead threat. Reports said she had no intention of sending forces north, that she planned to let the northern armies and Daenerys' forces fight and die, weakening both so she could pick up the pieces later. Tyrion, on reading the letter from King's Landing, its language dripping with sarcasm, closed his eyes in dismay. He read it aloud to the other leaders in the Great Hall. The Crown does not believe in fables of the dead walking. Even if such an army existed, it would be the duty of the North and the Dragon Queen to protect the realm you claim. Bend the knee or you face your doom alone. But do not expect reinforcements from King's Landing or the Crownlands. Daenerys' face hardened. I should have known better than to hope for reason from her. Sansa's stomach twisted with dread. That meant no help from the Southern Lords loyal to the Lannisters. They would stand alone or near enough. But the time for regrets had passed. They had to rely on themselves. As the sun began to sink on the second day, a horn blew from the watchtower. The watchers on the northern ramparts shouted, but the words were lost in a sudden gust of wind. Sansa stood with Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion, and the others on a parapet scanning the horizon. Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. At first, there was only a ripple in the distance, a faint shimmer through the blowing snow. Then they saw it, a mass of silhouettes stretching across the field like a black tide. The army of the dead. Even from afar, the watchers felt the suffocating magnitude of it. Sansa clenched the stone edge of the battlement until her fingers ached. The wind carried faint, discordant shrieks, an echo of horrors to come. Between Winterfell's walls and that approaching terror, a wide swath of open ground had been prepared with trenches, caltrops, and spikes. Fires burned in shallow pits, the smoke snatched away by the restless breeze. In the sky overhead, Drogon and Rhaegal flew in slow arcs, watchful. Sansa had prayed they would spot the undead dragon before it appeared over the castle's ramparts. If the Night King tried to circle behind them, the living dragons would pursue. Jon gave a curt nod. Man the defenses. Archers to the walls, swordsmen to the gate. Daenerys, if we see Viserion, you must keep him away from the fortress. She steadied herself, remembering the heartbreak in Daenerys's eyes, the agony of facing her own child as an undead monstrosity. But Daenerys simply lifted her chin. I will do what's necessary, she said. The soldiers mustered to their posts, hearts pounding. The night came faster than usual, darkness spreading over the plain. Torches flared on the battlements and the trench lines were lit, forming rings of flickering fire. The army of the dead advanced, unstoppable, pressing closer in an endless legion. Sansa stood near the main gate, behind the archers, her teeth clenched against the cold and the fear. Jon and Daenerys were preparing a plan to lure the Night King into the open sky, but Sansa could do little but watch from the walls. When the dead reached the first line of trenches, their front ranks lurched into the flames. Some whites caught fire, stumbling, thrashing in silent, gruesome convulsions. More pressed behind them. The sheer weight of their numbers began to smother the flames in places. Arrows rained down from above, each tipped with dragaglass. Many whites collapsed, pinned to the earth, but for every one that fell, 5 more pushed forward. The clash began with a roar of chaos. A wave of corpses hurled themselves at the lines of spikes, piling atop one another until living soldiers above the battlements gasped at the brutality. The smell of burning, rotted flesh wafted through the frigid air. Some unsullied manned ballistae loaded with dragonglass-tipped bolts firing into the mass. Shrieks rose from the darkness, a chorus of inhuman wailing that rattled the nerves. Then an unearthly roar tore across the night sky. Sansa looked up and saw a flash of pale blue. Like lightning, the undead dragon Viserion emerged from a low cloud, his maw glowing with some foul, icy fire. Another roar echoed in response, Drogon, massive and enraged, with Daenerys astride his back. Rhaegal joined, carrying Jon Snow. The living dragons collided with the undead one in the sky above Winterfell, their shapes twisted in savage aerial combat. Blue flame clashed with orange. The thunderous sound of wings beating overhead shook snow from the battlements. Sansa watched with her heart in her throat. From her vantage, it was nearly impossible to see which dragon was which in the swirling gloom, except for flashes of color, black scales, greenish scales, the pale, decaying white of Viserion's torn flesh. Occasionally, a gout of dragon fire lit up the sky, revealing the monstrous shape of the Night King on Viserion's back. Even at a distance, his presence radiated malevolence. Below, the army of the dead reached the outer palisades. Grey Worm ordered his phalanx of Unsullied to hold the line outside the main gate, determined to kill as many whites as possible before they reached the walls. Northern spearmen joined them, their faces stiff with terror. On the walls, archers continued raining down arrows and barrels of burning pitch were hurled, setting the ground ablaze. The first minutes of the battle were a frenzy of horrific noise, punctuated by the screams of men and the endless shrieking of the undead. Sansa forced herself to remain calm, to shout encouragement to those near her. She spotted Tyrion in the courtyard below, conferring with Ser Jorah, who had dismounted from his horse covered in gore. Tormund rushed across the rampart, bellowing at the archers to keep firing. It felt like a single heartbeat extended into minutes, time lost meaning in the haze of chaos. Then a tremor shook the earth, rattling the stones beneath Sansa's feet. She grabbed the battlement for balance. A searing blast of blue flame tore through the night sky, slamming into one of Winterfell's towers with a deafening crash. The stone exploded in shards, sending a portion of the tower crumbling into the courtyard below. Screams filled the air. The night momentarily lit up with that hellish glow. Sansa shielded her face from the wave of heat and debris. A rush of dread threatened to paralyze her. She saw the shape of Viserion overhead, that ghastly blue fire streaming from his jaws. Drogon and Rhaegal swooped in, flames erupting from their throats. Sansa prayed that the living dragons would drive him away from the castle's main keep. She glimpsed Daenerys' silhouette leaning low over Drogon's back, guiding him into a savage dive. The living dragons grappled with the undead one, massive jaws snapping. High above, the Night King raised his spear of ice. In a blur, he hurled it at Rhaegal. Rhaegal twisted, the spear shearing past his wing membrane with a sickening rip. The green dragon reeled, roaring in pain, while Jon clung on desperately. Below, the battle raged. The unspeakable numbers of the dead began to push aside the burning barricades, surging closer to Winterfell's walls. The first whites started to scale them, spider-like menaces that clutched at every crevice, oblivious to arrows piercing their torsos. Northern soldiers and Unsullied stabbed downward, dislodging or shattering the skeletons and decaying corpses. The motes of fire around the perimeter flickered and sputtered as more bodies heaped upon them. The living were beginning to tire. Sansa could see men sagging with fatigue, arms quivering under the weight of their swords. Gritting her teeth, Sansa turned to a cluster of guards who waited in reserve. "Go," she commanded. "Assist on the western wall. They're struggling there." The guards raced away. She hurried along the rampart, nearly colliding with Arya, who leapt onto the stones with a swirling grace, a dagger of Valyrian steel in one hand and a staff of dragaglass in the other. Arya's eyes were fierce, alive with the same lethal focus Sansa had seen in her since the day she returned. "Go inside, Sansa," Arya hissed. "You're not safe here." Sansa shook her head. "Neither are you," she said. "But I won't hide while our people fight." Arya gave her a piercing look, then nodded briskly. "Then keep your wits about you. And if you must kill one," she pressed a small dragaglass knife into Sansa's hand. "Stab them through the heart. That's all that matters." Sansa's fingers curled around the cold obsidian hilt. She watched Arya bound along the battlements like a wraith, vanishing into the fray. The next instant, a clamoring crash echoed from below. The gates shuddered, the dead were ramming them. Grey Worm and his Unsullied retreated inside the courtyard, forming ranks. They had lost many men, and the living line was thinning. An unholy screech cut through the air as Regal, wounded, crashed onto a parapet, smashing stone as he skidded. Jon tumbled off but managed to roll onto the walkway, cursing in pain. Regal spread his torn wings in a desperate attempt to take flight again, but he floundered. From the sky, Viserion descended, the Night King on his back. A swirl of snow and ice gusted around them, some dark magic conjured by the undead master. Jon staggered to his feet, drawing Longclaw. Sansa stared in horror as the Night King dismounted the undead dragon with smooth grace, landing on the broken stones not 20 yards from Jon. The creature, once a man, stood tall, crowned in horns of ice, eyes burning blue. In one hand, he clutched a wickedly sharp spear that glimmered in the torchlight. Jon did not hesitate. He lunged, sword raised. The Night King met the blow with an inhuman calm, parrying with the spear and sending Jon skidding back. Sparks flew. Sansa's heart thundered, every instinct telling her to run, but she stood rooted. The presence of the Night King felt like a vortex of cold. Below, Daenerys and Drogon soared in again, unleashing a torrent of flames at the undead ranks to prevent more whites from scaling the walls. But the Queen could not see Jon's predicament from this angle. Tyrion, in the courtyard, shouted warnings, yet no one could reach Jon in time. Whites began to climb the broken parapet to swarm Regal, and the wounded dragon roared, lashing out with teeth and claws. Stone crumbled beneath the fight. Sansa realized with a jolt of terror that Jon was alone with the Night King. She clutched the dragaglass dagger, her breath shaky. Down in the courtyard, Grey Worm's phalanx parted, and a handful of northern knights rushed forward. They wouldn't reach Jon in time. She turned to see Arya sprinting across the ramparts, but the path was blocked by collapsed masonry. Time was running out. The Night King speared forward again, and Jon managed to deflect the blow with Longclaw's Valyrian steel. But the clash rattled him, and he nearly lost his footing. The Night King advanced without mercy, driving Jon back toward a crumbling drop. Fear flashed in Jon's eyes, fear that he might not survive this time. Sansa felt a surge of desperate courage. She scrambled down a half-broken flight of steps, heading closer to the parapet. The cold wind stung her eyes, carrying flecks of ice. She gripped the dagger so tightly that her knuckles whitened. The thought of what she might do if she faced that monstrous being nearly froze her in place. She was not Arya, not Brienne, not a warrior, but she remembered her father's words. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. If Jon was lost, if the Night King triumphed now, their entire cause would fall apart. She emerged onto the broken parapet. Rubble lay scattered, and she found a vantage behind a collapsed portion of the wall. Jon was on the defensive, bleeding from a slash on his arm. The Night King's expression was implacable, each step methodical. Sansa's breath caught. She realized if the Night King succeeded in killing Jon, he would raise them all into his ranks. Just then, from the courtyard below, Daenerys spotted them. She urged Drogon upward to save Jon, but the moment she ascended, Viserion unleashed a torrent of blue flame at Drogon's flank. Daenerys cried out in fury and banked away to engage the undead dragon, leaving Jon still alone. Sansa saw an opening. The Night King was fixated on Jon, spear poised for a lethal thrust. She rushed forward, praying her footsteps would remain unnoticed in the chaos. Her heart slammed against her ribs so violently she could barely breathe. At the last instant, as the Night King lunged at Jon's unguarded back, Sansa hurled herself forward. She wasn't sure if she screamed, sound vanished in the blood-pounding rush. The dragonglass dagger plunged for the Night King's side. He twisted with uncanny speed, catching her wrist in a grip like iron. She cried out as the cold of his flesh bit into her bones. His other arm drew back, spear braced to impale her. She glimpsed his dead eyes, so blue they almost glowed. Time seemed to slow to a single heartbeat. Then Jon roared, swinging Longclaw in a horizontal slash. The Valyrian steel connected with the Night King's arm, severing it just below the elbow. A horrifying crack tore through the air, ice shards spraying. The severed arm disintegrated into a spray of frozen fragments, releasing Sansa's wrist. Gasping, she stumbled backward, the dagger slipping from her grip. Reeling from the blow, the Night King staggered. In that split second, Jon pressed the attack, pivoting, bringing Longclaw around in a vicious arc. The blade caught the Night King across the torso. With a piercing, inhuman shriek, the pale figure broke apart in an explosion of icy shards. They clattered onto the stone, dissolving into swirling snow and black dust. The Night King was gone, extinguished as though he had never been. Sansa stared, her breath frozen in her lungs, scarcely believing the sight. High above, Viserion let out a keening wail. Without the Night King's command, the undead dragon seemed to falter, losing the dark glow in its eyes. Drogon slammed into it from the side, raking with his claws. Viserion's half-decayed body shattered in midair, the bones crumbling. A rain of rotting flesh and frozen pieces of dragon plummeted onto the battlefield. The Night King's hold was broken. Across the plain, thousands of wights collapsed in unison. The defenders on the walls froze, stunned, as the once relentless horde fell to the ground like puppets with their strings severed. Silence followed, so profound that Sansa could hear her own ragged breathing. She looked at Jon, who remained upright by some miracle. He met her eyes, and a tremulous smile tugged at his lips. She dropped to her knees, relief overwhelming her. The wind still howled, the night still bitterly cold, but the immediate horror was over. Arya, Brienne, Tyrion, Tormund, Grey Worm. They all converged on the courtyard and walls, staring in awe and confusion at the suddenly inert army that had threatened to consume them. A wave of cheers rose from the living, some exultant, others shell-shocked. Victory was theirs, though it felt impossible. Jon stumbled toward Sansa, dropping to one knee, ignoring his wounds. He clasped her shoulders, eyes bright with gratitude. They embraced, shakily, neither able to speak. Tyrion arrived, short of breath, gazing at the shards where the Night King once stood. "It's done," he whispered, almost disbelieving. Daenerys landed Drogon in the courtyard a moment later, her hair disheveled, face streaked with tears and ash. She saw the remains of the Night King and the still forms of the wights. Then she slipped from Drogon's side, falling to her knees in exhaustion and grief. Jon and Sansa hurried to her. The Queen managed a half-choked laugh of relief. "We did it," she said, though her voice trembled with sorrow for Viserion. The cost was beyond high. Corpses of men and women lay scattered among the lifeless undead. Parts of Winterfell's outer walls were shattered, flames still smoldering in a dozen places. The acrid stench of burning flesh lingered in the freezing air. Still, they had achieved what once seemed hopeless. They had destroyed the Night King and ended his army in a single stroke. Sansa's heart thumped with the enormity of it. Was it truly over? In the tense hours that followed, they combed the battlefield, ensuring that every last wight lay lifeless. Indeed, without the Night King's magic, they were no more threatening than scattered bones. Many of the living had died, but many yet lived thanks to the dragons, thanks to the alliances forged, and Sansa realized thanks to a moment of desperate courage. Dawn broke across Winterfell with an otherworldly stillness. The sun rose over piled snow over the battered castle where living dragons perched on half-collapsed towers. The wind, though cold, carried a faint promise of renewal. From the gates, men and women emerged to begin the grim task of gathering their dead. It was a scene of heartbreak and exhaustion, but also, somehow, hope. The army of the dead was gone. Sansa made her way through the courtyard, stepping gingerly around fallen beams and rubble. She paused at the sight of gray-haired Ser Jorah leaning against a broken cart, a bloody bandage wrapped around his middle. He managed a strained nod. "My queen lives," he said, voice thick. "My purpose is fulfilled." Sansa laid a hand on his shoulder, offering what comfort she could. "Rest," she urged him. "All of us must rest now." Nearby, Daenerys knelt beside Rhaegal, who lay panting on the ground, his torn wing extended. The queen murmured softly to him, stroking his scales. Drogon crouched protectively as though sharing in the pain. Jon stood close, a quiet presence, unsure how to comfort her. The relief of victory mingled with sorrow over what it had cost. Viserion was lost, and thousands of their own had perished. Sansa joined them, her footsteps hesitant. Daenerys lifted her gaze, eyes reddened by tears. "He'll heal," she said, indicating Rhaegal's wing. "We'll need a skilled maester to tend him, but he's strong." Sansa nodded. "We'll do all we can." Jon placed a gentle hand on Daenerys' shoulder. "Your dragons saved us all," he murmured. "We owe them everything." She looked away, pained. "If only I could have saved Viserion. But we did what we had to." A hush fell, each grappling with that bittersweet truth. Then Daenerys turned to Sansa, her expression softening. "I saw you on the wall," she said quietly. "You risked your life. I owe you my thanks." Sansa looked down, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. "I only did what I had to," she echoed. "We stand or fall together." Daenerys rose slowly, wiping at her eyes. "Yes. Let us hope the rest of Westeros realizes that before too long." Word of the victory spread in the following days. Messengers carried accounts far and wide that the Night King and his legion had been defeated at Winterfell. Survivors, each with their own story of horror and heroism, spoke of the fierce battle in which Targaryen dragons and Northern Steel united to push back death itself. For the first time in generations, the North's ancient enemy was gone. In the aftermath, the mood in Winterfell was a conflicted mix of mourning and triumph. Funeral pyres were built outside the ruined walls to honor the fallen. The Northern lords stood side by side with Unsullied and Dothraki, paying respects to each other's dead. Sansa ensured that the Stark's traditions were observed, for even though the Targaryen forces had different customs, unity in the face of such a shared tragedy seemed right. One crisp morning, as the sun tried to pierce the heavy clouds, Sansa walked along the scorched ruins of the outer courtyard. The acrid scent of smoke clung to everything. She paused at the spot where the Night King had fallen. Only a scattering of blackened ice fragments and melted snow remained. It felt surreal that the threat looming over them all for so long had been vanquished in an instant of combined resolve. Tyrion approached from behind, a cloak wrapped around him. He stood in silence for a moment, gazing at the same spot. "You changed the future by sending that letter," he said softly. "If Daenerys had been south, if she and Jon Snow had not combined forces, I doubt we'd be standing here now." Sansa turned to him, her breath forming soft clouds in the chilly air. "It doesn't feel real yet. I keep expecting the dead to rise again." He exhaled. "I know the feeling, but the threat is gone. Now we face only the living, and that may be its own challenge." She arched a brow. "You speak of Cersei." Tyrion's mouth twisted in a wry grimace. "Indeed, she is no doubt plotting how best to exploit this. With the Night King gone, there is nothing to unite the realm behind Daenerys. Houses that were on the fence might drift back to old allegiances, especially those who fear Dragonfire or the North's independence." Sansa swallowed. "We need to present a united front. That's what Daenerys and Jon are discussing now, isn't it? Whether the North remains independent or bends the knee, how we move forward." Tyrion nodded, crossing his arms. "Yes, and from what I gather, neither is keen to fight a war among the living. But Cersei might force it upon us all." He paused, studying Sansa. "And what do you want, my lady?" "For the North." She hesitated, thinking of her father, her mother, the direwolf sigil, all the blood shed for independence. Then she thought of the dragons overhead, of Daenerys' willingness to risk everything to save them. "I want peace," Sansa said, her voice certain. Peace, and a realm that doesn't devour its own. If Daenerys Targaryen can bring that, perhaps the North can stand with her. If she rules as a tyrant, we will not. A small smile curved Tyrion's lips. Spoken like a true leader of the North. They turned, gazing at the ramparts where the living dragons perched, one injured, the other watchful. In the swirl of gray sky, crows circled, cawing at the newly found quiet of a battlefield that had once been filled with screams. Sansa thought about how precarious alliances could be, how swiftly triumph could turn to tragedy. But for now, they were alive, and that was not a small thing. In the following weeks, a semblance of routine returned. The surviving forces helped repair the worst damage to Winterfell, though it would take months to fully restore. Some among the Dothraki, still uneasy in the cold, nonetheless assisted in patrolling the roads. The Unsullied maintained discipline, quietly integrating with the northern men in daily drills. Sansa saw how shared battle had forged mutual respect, bridging differences she would have once thought impossible. Bran Stark, who had quietly retreated to a corner of the castle during the battle, spoke little of what he had witnessed in his visions. But he confirmed that the threat had truly ended, that the powers animating the dead were extinguished with the Night King. When Sansa asked how he knew, he only said, "The three-eyed raven sees many things," before lapsing into silence again. Sansa was not sure if that knowledge comforted her or filled her with a deeper sense of mystery. Arya trained daily in the courtyard, a swirl of deadly grace that drew admiration from the Dothraki and Unsullied alike. Yet her eyes seemed distant, as though she, too, struggled to accept peace after so many years of war. Gendry, forging new weapons in the smithy, often stole glances at her. Sansa noticed, but held her tongue. War changed people in ways that made old grudges and boundaries feel irrelevant. Jon spent much of his time with Daenerys. Though they were often embroiled in discussions with Tyrion, Ser Davos, who had arrived with more men after the battle, and other advisors, there was a closeness between them that none could mistake. Sansa saw how they leaned on each other, how Daenerys's fierce spirit matched Jon's unwavering sense of honor. It was a curious pairing, but not a surprising one. They had both borne crowns they never expected, carried responsibilities that weighed heavily on them. One twilight, Sansa stood on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, watching Daenerys and Jon walk across the flagstones together. They spoke softly, heads bent close. Drogon perched on a repaired section of wall, craning his neck to watch them. The swirling snow and orange glow of torches cast everything in a kind of dreamlike haze. Sansa couldn't hear their words, but she recognized the tenderness in their gestures, the gentleness with which Daenerys touched Jon's bandaged arm. Sansa's throat tightened. So much had changed. The war with the dead had ended, but a new chapter was beginning, one that might define the future of Westeros. She thought again of the letter she had penned so long ago, the choice she made to invite Daenerys Targaryen north. A single act had rewritten everything. She closed her eyes, letting the wind brush her cheeks. The memory of the hopelessness she once felt replaced by a cautious hope. When she opened them, Daenerys was looking up at her. Their eyes met across the courtyard. The queen raised a hand in a small salute. Sansa nodded in acknowledgement. That silent exchange of understanding and respect spoke volumes. They were no longer strangers on opposite sides of a kingdom's fractured destiny. They were allies, perhaps in some way even friends, bound by the knowledge of what they had sacrificed to save the living. It was not long after that Daenerys called a gathering of lords and commanders in the Great Hall. Despite the repairs still underway, the hall was serviceable. A large fire crackled at the front, warming the space as best it could in the deep winter. The banners of House Stark and House Targaryen hung side by side, a vivid reminder of the new bond that had taken shape. Sansa took her seat on one side of the dais, while Jon and Daenerys stood before the gathered men and women. "We have won the Great War," Daenerys began, her voice carrying clearly. "The army of the dead is destroyed. The Night King is gone. We stand victorious together." A low murmur of approval swept the hall. Some faces looked odd, others wore the grim set of recent tragedy. Jon took up the speech. "Yet our work is not done. The realm is broken and the Iron Throne remains contested. Queen Cersei has made her intentions clear. She will not come to our aid, and she does not believe in alliances. Daenerys' gaze shifted across the audience. For too long, Westeros has been shattered by petty feuds, by cycles of betrayal. I came here to the north in the hopes that we could forge a better world together. That is still my hope. She paused, letting the words sink in. I will march south soon to claim the throne that is mine by birthright. But I have no wish to spill more blood. I ask that those who follow me here and those who have joined in this alliance continue with me in peace, if peace can be won. Sansa's eyes flicked to Tyrion, who wore an expression of careful optimism. Then she studied the northern lords, Lord Glover, Lord Manderly, the leaders of the Vale. They exchanged uneasy glances. The old tensions still existed. The North had never forgotten how the Targaryen dynasty once burned their forebears. Yet Daenerys had saved them from an unimaginable horror. The debt of gratitude was immense. Jon spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. I bent the knee to Daenerys Targaryen once before because I believed she could help us fight the dead. She did. She risked everything for us, for all living people. I stand by my choice. He paused, looking at the lords who had named him king in the north. I cannot command any of you to follow me, but I ask you to consider what she has done and what we can achieve if we remain united. A silence followed. Then Lord Manderly rose, his hefty form draped in furs. King Jon, he began, then caught himself. My lord, we followed you because we believed your cause was just, and the Dragon Queen proved her valor and her mercy in saving us from the undead. Let it be known that House Manderly will continue to stand by the Stark family and by Daenerys Targaryen. The time for our realm to unite is long overdue. A ripple of agreement followed, though some lords hesitated. One or two expressed concerns about southern politics, but none could deny the truth of Daenerys' deeds. The seeds of grudging respect and gratitude were sown. Sansa breathed a silent sigh of relief. They were forging a new path, and it seemed the North, or at least a majority of it, would not abandon them. When the meeting adjourned, Sansa lingered at the high table. Daenerys approached, flanked by Missandei, who was deep in conversation with Tyrion. The queen inclined her head to Sansa. Thank you for your support and for trusting me. Sansa met her gaze, thinking of all the heartbreak and nightmares that had led them here. You made it possible to dream of a future, Sansa said. For that, you'll always have my gratitude. Daenerys smiled, the expression touched with sorrow and a glimmer of hope. The war against the dead is over. The war for the living's future remains. She looked toward Jon, who was deep in conversation with Tormund. If we stand together, perhaps we can build a realm worth living in. Sansa nodded. We'll try. And if there's anything the North knows, it's how to endure. In the days that followed, the combined forces prepared to depart Winterfell, or at least a significant portion of them. Many of the Dothraki longed for warmer lands, and Daenerys would need the bulk of her armies to secure the throne in King's Landing. Jon planned to ride with her, and the Northerners who wished to support that cause were free to come. Others would remain, rebuilding their villages and strongholds. Sansa chose to stay at Winterfell as its guardian to oversee the North's recovery. Yet she did not do so in opposition to Daenerys, rather it was an extension of trust. Even if Daenerys claimed the Iron Throne, the North would be safeguarded in its own traditions and autonomy so long as they maintained alliance. On the morning of departure, a fresh layer of snow blanketed the courtyard. Daenerys wore a white fur-trimmed cloak that Sansa had gifted her, a token of respect from the North. Drogon soared overhead, regal still on the mend but strong enough to fly short distances. Jon said farewell to Sansa outside the gates where the columns of soldiers waited, unsullied, Dothraki, Northern volunteers, Knights of the Vale. It was a sight that would have been unimaginable just weeks before. Jon embraced Sansa. I'll return when I can, he promised. If we can negotiate a peaceful surrender from Cersei, we will. If not, his voice trailed off, eyes reflecting the somber possibility of more bloodshed. Sansa touched his cheek. You'll succeed, she said. You have Daenerys, you have dragons, and you have the North's belief. She paused, swallowing. Just be careful. He nodded, releasing her. Then Daenerys approached, inclining her head. Lady Stark. Sansa mustered a small smile. Your Grace. May your journey south be safe and your cause just. We'll pray for your victory. The Queen regarded her for a moment, searching Sansa's face. Then she said, You once forged an alliance with a letter. Do not hesitate to reach me if you need anything. Winterfell is not alone. Sansa's throat tightened, unexpectedly touched by the offer. Nor are you, she replied. With that, Daenerys climbed atop Drogon, graceful despite her heavy attire. Jon and Regal rose into the sky, flanks still bandaged but wings beating strong. The thunder of dragon wings resonated through Winterfell's walls. One by one, the columns of soldiers moved out onto the King's Road, banners snapping in the chill wind. The face of every warrior was set with determination, for they knew they faced one final conflict to secure the future they had nearly lost to the dead. Sansa stood at the gates until the last of them vanished into the swirling snow. A strange quiet fell upon the fortress. Despite the battered walls, the memories of the dreadful night that had nearly swallowed them, Winterfell stood firm. She pictured the dragons flying south, felt a pang of fear for the battles to come. But she also felt pride in what the North and the Targaryen queen had accomplished together. Perhaps the realm would be reshaped into something better, not merely saved from death but elevated beyond the old cycles of revenge. Perhaps Daenerys, hardened by loss, would keep her promise of mercy. Perhaps Jon would guide her as she guided him, forging a leadership that honored both the love of the people and the necessity of strength. Sansa could not see the future, but the path now lay open. She turned and walked back into Winterfell, the crisp snow crunching under her boots. Servants bustled about, carrying supplies to the kitchens or setting to repairs. A few children peeked around corners, curiosity in their eyes. They had grown up knowing only war and fear, but now they witnessed hope. Sansa offered them a gentle nod and they darted away with nervous smiles. The day wore on and Sansa spent it organizing the reconstruction, speaking with the maester about supply lines, instructing the blacksmiths on forging more tools rather than weapons. The sense of normalcy was odd but not unwelcome. By dusk, her feet ached and she found herself alone in the library tower. A single candle lit the chamber. The old tomes and scrolls around her smelled of dust and parchment. She remembered her father, who had once shown her these shelves when she was a little girl. Back then, her greatest worry had been learning how to curtsy gracefully. She sank into a chair, exhaling slowly. The dragonglass dagger Arya had given her rested at her belt, a reminder of the moment she had stood, trembling, against the Night King. She set it on the table and ran her fingertips over the smooth obsidian blade. The memory sent a chill through her, but also a flicker of resolve. If she could do that, then she could face anything else that came. Her eyes strayed to a piece of parchment lying on the table, empty and waiting. She thought of Daenerys' words, "You once forged an alliance with a letter. Do not hesitate to reach me if you need anything." A small smile crossed Sansa's lips. She dipped the quill in ink and began to write, penning a short missive, a message of goodwill and caution, carrying her hope for a swift resolution in the south. She signed it simply, Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell. As she folded the parchment and dripped wax for the seal, she heard the wind outside, the same wind that had howled for months, heralding winter's fury. Only now it seemed less menacing, almost companionable. They had survived the worst winter could offer. They had ended the Great War before it consumed them. The Game of Thrones might continue, but for once, the living had a genuine chance to shape a better world. Rising, she carried the sealed letter to the rookery. A raven fluttered in its cage, black eyes gleaming. Gently, she tied the message to its leg. The bird flapped onto her arm, surprisingly light, and then she released it into the twilight sky. She watched it vanish, carrying her words across the expanse that separated Winterfell from Daenerys Targaryen's new campaign. A leap of faith, once more. Sansa turned away from the window, letting the night air curl around her. The faintest trace of a smile lingered on her face, tempered by all she had witnessed. There was much work ahead, dangers still lurking, but they had taken the first step in forging a realm where dragons and wolves, Targaryens and Starks, no longer needed to be enemies. Perhaps the Seven Kingdoms, or however many chose to remain under one banner, would stand together at last, neither locked in endless civil war nor threatened by an undead tide. The halls of Winterfell seemed warmer that night, the fires more welcoming. In her heart, Sansa carried both the scars of the past and the fragile promise of a new era. Outside, the cold winds still raged, but somewhere south, the queen who had once answered her letter flew toward yet another struggle, guided by purpose and, perhaps, by hope. And so, in the quiet, Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell, allowed herself one moment of stillness. She remembered the sound of dragons in the sky, the roar of the undead army, the black ice that was the Night King's heart, and the furious clash of steel. She remembered the thousands who had fought and bled, united behind a cause that transcended bloodlines and crowns. If that unity could endure, maybe they would at last break the wheel of endless war. She whispered softly to herself and to the memory of all who had fallen, "We survived winter. Now we must learn to live in what comes after." Then she turned from the window, the candlelight dancing on the stone walls, and made her way to her chambers. The promise of a new dawn beckoned beyond the darkness, a dawn the living had earned with everything they had. She did not doubt that new wars would come, that betrayal still lurked in the hearts of men and women, but she clung to the certainty that this time the North had found a friend in fire and the dragons had found an ally in ice. The realm might yet heal from its wounds. And as long as brave hearts reached out to one another, in letters or on battlefields, there was hope that the days of ruin would fade into the annals of history, replaced at last by a season of peace.